seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
It was different. If I had done something else, I don't know what I would have done.
We're talking today with Bill Alverson of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Bill, begin with a little bit of background on yourself, and to start with, where and when were you born?
Okay, I was born in Olympia, Washington in 1929.
Okay. Did you grow up there, or did you
Yes.
move around?
I grew up, my family was there for a long time and had no intention of going on. I thought I was going to be a high school football coach there, had it set up, and I had taken ROTC in college. And
now, when you were a kid, what did your family do for a living?
my father was an unskilled laborer, worked sawmills. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and there was one brother other than me. I was the oldest of two.
Oh, well, you're growing up in the 30s. That's the Depression. Yes. Did your father have steady work?
No.
Okay.
He always had something, and I was too young. I was born in 29,
yeah.
And we were in the Depression, no question about it. But as kids, we didn't know anything about it. I had a full stomach and a warm place to sleep, and people loved me, and so we didn't know it until after I grew up and started looking back.
All right. Now, you were still a kid when Pearl Harbor happened, but do you remember hearing about that?
Oh, I certainly do. That Sunday we were chopping wood when that happened, and it was very tense in the state of Washington at that time because we thought that the Japanese might land there or bomb us or something, and they rapidly formed civilian defense things. And in fact, when I was 12 when it happened, I became a messenger, a civilian defense bicycle messenger. Had a World War I helmet. I thought I was a real guy, and it was painted white with a bolt of lightning to indicate messenger. And whenever they had drills or anything, I had to go to the Army, and I'd pedal my bicycle wherever.
Yeah. Were there any Japanese Americans living in your community?
Yes, there was. Well, a good friend of mine. He was moved out, and we never saw him again. And his family had a strawberry farm. In fact, they hired me and my brother to pick strawberries, and we were, I thought, very close. And I'm sure they weren't involved in anything.
Well, almost all of them were not.
No.
It was just a political thing as much as anything else.
But it always bothered me that I've never seen him to this day. Never even heard about him. And his family didn't have the farm when they came back, and I don't know who owned it or how they got possession, or if the Tahers owned it at that time. But anyway, I never saw him.
Well, there's just another incident there that happened on the West Coast. That's what happened to the Japanese American families. So yeah, they went there. Okay. Now you're getting older. Did you wonder if the war was going to drag on long enough for you to get into it?
You know, this sounds crazy and stupid. In a way, I hoped it did. I felt I should go, and that's one of the reasons when I was in college. And people think I'm crazy, but I was glad to go when Korea started. Or when I came eligible to go into it. And I felt I owed something to the country. And it sounds corny today, but that's the way I felt.
Well, I think at the time it would be fairly understandable because you're growing up and you're getting older and getting teenage boy, that kind of thing, while there's this war going on and all the guys a little bit older than you are going over and doing it, and it's presented as a very positive thing that you're doing it for your country. So it would seem like, and it's something that you're kind of maybe geared up to expect. Yeah. So in that sense, probably not so silly after all. You can have hindsight and then look at what wars you got into or whatever and view that differently. Yeah. But okay, so basically now where do you go to college?
Washington State University, or Washington State College then. In the southeast corner of Washington. Pullman is the town.
Okay. Now, did you start ROTC right away, or does that come later?
No, I started right away. It was a land grant school, and because I was not an ex-serviceman and I was in good physical condition, all males had to take the first 2 years ROTC. The last 2 years were voluntary.
Okay, and then you of course stay in for those and finish that. Now, what sorts of actual military training or education do you get while you're in ROTC?
Oh, we got a lot of leadership training, book-type leadership, map reading, that kind of thing. In the summer camp that we had just 1 year, 6-week summer camp, why then it was regular military training. I mean, not all the marching and everything. We did a lot of marching in the college, but kind of Mickey Mouse stuff. And but when we went to the summer camp, that was kind of like a mild basic training. We had all compass course, all the rifle marksmanship, pistol, machine gun, mortars. We'd fire, and it was like a basic training.
Okay. Now, was this just the Washington State College ROTC, or were there other people with you there?
Yeah, the whole 6th Army area
Okay.
would send there, and you went typically at the end of between your junior and senior year, and the whole colleges from 6th Army area, and occasionally some from outside. For some, if the kids had a personal reason or something, why they'd make a set and send them. And I would guess there at summer camp there was about, I would guess 2,500 cadets.
Okay. And where did they do the summer camp?
At Fort Lewis, Washington.
Okay.
Right, only 15 miles from my home.
All right. So you do that. Now, of course, while you're in college near ROTC, the Korean War breaks out. And when, well, I guess, first of all, let's see, well, when do you actually finish college?
I finished college in 1951, graduated in June of 51.
All right. And then at this point, do you get your commission?
Yes. I was offered a regular Army commission. I was designated a distinguished military student or whatever it is. And I wasn't going to accept it, and because it meant an extra year. And I was wanting to get out, and I wanted to coach football in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And the PMS called me in, and he says, Bill, if you take this regular commission, I think he had to sell them, I'm not sure, but if you accept this regular commission, why, you get better assignments and regular officers get promoted faster. And I said, they do?
Mm-hmm.
And so I took the regular
That was
commission.
the hook in your end. Now, did they send you to additional training at this stage?
Yes, I went right away to Fort Benning, Georgia, the home of the infantry. We call it Fort Beginning. Mm-hmm. All new second lieutenants and a lot of other people go there. It was about a 4-month course, and it was in weapons and tactics and map reading and communications.
Okay. Some descriptions that I've had of that from a little bit later period suggest that one of the things they do is they give you more of a real boot camp than you had before.
Oh yes, much more. They kind of put us in the Army. We weren't playing anymore. Some of us did for as long as we could get away with it, but no, you pretty well, you decided you better shape up and pay attention to what they're telling you.
Okay, so this is where you get sort of the kind of the discipline emphasis,
Yes.
As well as physical conditioning.
Oh yes, right. A lot of PT, a lot of running, and then a lot of us tried to go to jump school while we were there. The basic jump school was there. I tried, and my student company commander thought I was trying to avoid Korea, and I'd already volunteered for Korea, but so he wouldn't let me go, and I didn't go until later. I did go later, but not at that time.
All right. So there was the expectation with the Korean War going on that there was certainly a need for second lieutenants over there.
Oh yes.
So you spend your sort of 4 months in the basic school, and then is it off to Korea?
Yes. Well, yes and no. We left the States in January of '52 on a troop ship, and then went to Yokohama, and then most all the second lieutenants were funneled off at that time to units that were in Japan, and they had at that time what they called a 6-month introduction effort for second lieutenants, and it was the greatest thing that ever happened for me. I was sent up to Hokkaido, the northernmost island, with the 1st Cavalry Division, 7th Cav Regiment, and the company commander I worked for was a fantastic guy, big guy, 6'4", but he's smart as a whip, and he was tough, but he was fair. And Captain Braun, William F. Braun, and he's the reason I think that I stayed in the Army, is because of him. I guess I get emotional talking about that. Kind of a baby.
Now the Cav had gone over into Korea back in 1950, and they
That's
had been
right.
involved in the march north into North Korea and all of that.
Yeah.
Had he been part of that?
Yes, he had. And he had been at the tail end of World War II. He had been as an infantry officer also. And they came back to refurbish and re-equip and staff the Cav.
Mm-hmm.
And they eventually went back to Korea before it was over. But I wasn't with them when they went back.
So what were you doing up there for those 6 months?
Oh, just troop training, normal, we would squad platoon tactics, doing march to contact, what does a point do, and just very basic combat things that we would need and use there. And most of the enlisted men had been in combat, and it made it better for us, for the brand new officers. I mean, of course, second lieutenants are known for thinking they know everything and they don't know anything, and I was typical. But I had a good captain that knew what was going on, and the non-commissioned officers were good, and they really taught me. And it was a fine experience. In fact, it took so long, I thought I was not going to go to Korea, so I put a request in to bring my dependents. I was married at the time, had a son that I had never seen yet, and I thought that I'd bring them over. Well, that must have triggered it, because as soon as I put that in, bam, I'm on orders, and I'm going to Korea, so, which was fine.
All right. And that was the general expectation. They were bringing the new officers out, and they're getting some leadership experience and so forth, and
Right.
some additional training before they send them over to Korea. But the unit that you were with stays there, and you go join a different unit.
Different unit, that's
Okay.
correct.
So what unit did you join?
I joined the 15th Infantry, 3rd Infantry Division, and it was another E Company, Easy Company. And it was kind of amusing, because on the way up there, all the repo depots and the places up, we had our weapon, but we never had any ammunition. And I was up on the front line. I didn't have any ammunition. And my battalion commander, he said, he took me out and pointed to a hill up there and said, "That's where your Easy Company is. You can join them." And I said, "Well, sir, I'd like to, I don't have any ammunition. I have a weapon, but no ammunition." You can get it when you get up there." Well, for a new guy, there was no small arms firing going on, but I could hear artillery in the distance and so on. And I was a little hyped up. I'd never been in war before, and I thought there was a Chinaman behind every tree. But
Okay. To back up a little bit, what was life like in Japan for those 6 months?
It was a lot of training, a lot of hard work, and very little, if any, time off. We were in the town of Sapporo, and they later had the Olympics up there. And the only time I got into Sapporo was when I was on what they called courtesy patrol. An officer, a second lieutenant, and an NCO would go in, and if we got any guys in trouble, and we'd put them on a truck and send them back to the base. And that's the only time I got to go into town.
So you didn't have a whole lot of contact with Japanese civilians or anything else like that?
Hardly. I'd say none. Some of them would work on the base post, but and we'd see them, but no, very seldom.
All right. Now, what was your impression of Korea when you got there?
Oh, I'd never seen a place like that in my life. I read about third world countries, and of course it was torn up from the war, and the people had nothing, and I just felt sorry for them. It was sanitation wasn't good. You could smell it, and I got to know some of the military types, but I didn't get to know any of the civilians. But it was a tough place.
Okay. Now, what time of year was it when you got up to the front?
It was in August.
Okay.
When we got summer was just going, and of course, and the cold winter came, and they're cold.
Right. But when you get there, anyway, at least it's not winter at that point.
No.
Now, what sort of sector, if you were kind of looking, you're kind of sort of east to west across the middle of the peninsula, kind of where were you?
We were out of a little town called Chorwan, which is just south of where the 38th parallel was, and in the west central part, the Chorwan Valley, which had been an invasion route and all, we were on one bank of the Chorwan Valley, relatively flat in the valley, of course, but in the mountains on both sides, and it was what everybody sees of Korea, the mountains and all that. Not as bad as it was over on the east side, because it tapered off on the west side down to the water. But we were a good ways. I mean, we were, I would guess, 50, 60 miles from the water going east.
Okay. Now, was there much going on in your sector when you got there?
When I first got there, no. And of course, that's when the biggest operations were company or battalion size. There was no big push-up, but both sides were trying to adjust their line for a determined defense. And we had outposts and so on. So most of our action was patrolling, and your mission was to go out and make contact. or you'd go out and recon this, or you wanted to develop a situation if you could. Occasionally, they would come in a big bunch at you, and that got to be pretty interesting pretty quick. But it was generally pretty quiet, and I always tell everybody that it's quiet unless somebody's shooting at you, and it's not. It doesn't have to be a big battle, but when somebody's shooting at you, it's pretty big, personally.
All right. And what kind of condition was your company in when you joined it?
We were on the online in the foxholes and bunkers, a pretty stagnant time. They had done a good job building bunkers. They were pretty stout. The engineers would make them like Lincoln logs and take 12 by 12s and cut notches and put a number on them, and we had to put A and B and 1 and 2. But it was a stable position, well defended. We had barbed wire mines to our front, and most of the operation was just, once in a while they'd probe you, but most of the time it was patrolling.
Okay. And was your company under strength?
Yes. Okay. And then one thing about it that amazed me, I don't know if it's because we ran out of U.S. soldiers or what, but a third of my platoon, a platoon is about 40 men, and that's what a second lieutenant has when you get there. It's supposed to be about 40 men. You never had 40. You had something less than 40. But a third of my men were GIs. Another third were Korean soldiers that they brought in. They didn't speak English. I couldn't speak Korean. And the last third were Puerto Ricans. The 65th Regiment, Puerto Rican, was a part of a 3rd Division at that time. And when they first got there, they had been a good, outstanding regiment. But they had so many replacements and all, and they weren't cutting the mustard. And so they took them offline and split them up. And so we got a third. That's what my strength was, a third Puerto Rican, a third Korean, and a third GI. And I had an outstanding platoon sergeant. And I told him, I said, LeBlue, you and I make a fine pair because neither of us speak any of the other language. I said, when you get scared, he was a Cajun from Louisiana. I said, you start speaking French, and when I get scared, my voice gets higher and I can't make any noise. It's just, and so we can't talk to him and I can't make any noise to him. And we make a fine pair, but he was a good man,
All right. And how often would you go out on patrol?
Oh, I would say once or twice a week. Your company and the officers in the company took turn, and that meant the platoons took turn. And it would be about twice a week we'd have a patrol of some kind. Okay.
Now, would you do these at night or by day?
Most all of them were at night. Okay. I always said I'd trade 6 day patrols for one, or the other way around. I didn't want to do the night patrols because they were more difficult and dangerous. But it was, everybody took your turn. When it came your time, you went. And
okay. And was the point of those mostly just intelligence gathering, or?
Intelligence, and yes, that's what it was. And to let them know we were still here and we weren't backing off, and they did the same with us.
Okay. And I don't know, how dangerous or costly was the patrolling over the course of the time you were there?
I'd say it's quite costly. And I'd read some books later. I didn't really understand at that time, but they had almost as many casualties in the last part as they did in the first part when they were going up and down. We had several casualties. We had a couple guys taken prisoner off on a patrol, and of course, just flat out killed and wounded, and that alters your patrol, and you've got to make some adjustments, and you never leave anybody. You bring everybody back, and it got to be interesting sometimes that you ran your understrength to begin with.
Now, as far as you know, were you facing Chinese soldiers at this point?
Yes. I don't think we faced Koreans at all. And the rumor was on our side that it was better to face the Chinese than the Koreans. The Koreans were meaner and more ornery, and if they picked you up, you'd be in bad trouble. The Chinese weren't good, but they weren't as bad as the Koreans. That was the rumors and the story, and I subscribed to it, even though, to my knowledge, I never ran into a Korean soldier.
Okay. Now, when I asked a little bit about sort of how much action was going on, basically, did things get more intense in terms of fighting or enemy action later on as you stayed there?
Yes. Towards the end, before the armistice kicked in, both sides were really trying to get the best defensive position they could. The peace talks were going on, and they knew it was going to be soon. And so both sides wanted to get the best defensive positions. And so we were very active. They were active, and had some real sharp battles. Outpost Harry, everybody reads about. In our case, it was Jackson Heights, which is in the same general area. And then some of the others on the other side, Whitehorse, and I can't think of any right now.
Okay. Well, in your sector, did the front lines wind up changing any before the end? So you held your positions.
We
and they
held ours,
theirs.
and they held theirs. We had what we thought was the best, or at least I guess our superiors thought it wasn't worth the casualties to take another one would be the same or not as good. And we knew them. We had all our weapons and all were dug in, and it was. They said no. As a matter of fact. At one time, I was a company commander, and just became a company commander, and across from us was a mortar that every day would get a casualty in my company. Sometimes it'd kill them. And so I put in a request, and I drew some overlays and all. I wanted to make a raid up there and get rid of that mortar. And it came back disapproved, and somebody had written on it, "What are you trying to do, start a war?" And I thought, what am I here for? And so we kept getting at least one casualty a day from that mortar.
Okay.
And fell out of that.
Were you able to call in air or artillery support when you needed it?
Excellent artillery. Air wasn't all that good, but then they're traveling pretty fast. And but I think, and I'm not just making up, the United States Army artillery is the best in the world. Those guys can hit the target. They're quick. They can move it. Of course, I'd never tell them that. I'd say, you red legs, you're always dropping one short to keep us awake or something like that. But they're the best in the world.
All right. Now, when the Chinese attacked you, how did they go about it? Did they have a standard procedure?
Yeah, it seemed that they did. They would come in waves, and the first couple of waves had weapons. The second may not, and they were to pick up from. And they did a lot of whistle blowing and trumpet and that, and they were persistent. They were good soldiers. They would come out sometimes and lay there all day, and we wouldn't even know they were out there. And then they'd jump up at a prescribed time, and they were on us before we thought they could get there. So we had to pay attention. But they were good soldiers.
Now, in your sector, did they ever actually break into your positions, or
No.
just get really close?
They got close.
Okay.
We didn't want them in there. We had. And where we were at the time that I was there, they didn't get a breakthrough. We had to counterattack one night from a breakthrough in another area, and we were the reserve, and so that's our job as reserve. And that was not a good thing. Night attack is tough to do, but we had to restore the line, and we did.
Okay. About how long did that take, do you think?
Oh, it took all night till daylight the next day.
Okay.
Yeah.
But basically, the enemy does not get a lodgment in your lines
No.
at the end of all
No,
that.
well, we were there.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's because we were so good. I don't mean that at all. But it's the way it was.
Right. All right. And then, were you still there when the armistice was announced?
No.
Okay.
I came home in April, latter part of April. No, 1st of May I came home. And the armistice was, July 27th or something like that, I think.
Okay. Are there particular events or aspects of that year in Korea that sort of stand out in your memory that you kind of haven't brought in here yet?
Oh, yeah. And I have trouble. A friend of mine was killed saving me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you saw quite a bit while you were there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why I get so emotional over this. It's been a long time ago.
Okay. During the time you were there, did you have a lot of men rotating out and being replaced? So
Yeah.
the personnel was kind of turning over a lot during that period.
Yeah. Except the U.S., both Puerto Rican and Korean did. But the Koreans, those poor guys, they were stuck. That's their country. And we got to know them. We couldn't talk to them, but we knew them and make jokes with them and that kind of thing. And the best thing about they were pretty steady once they got to know you, but it took a while for them to get to know you. And I can understand. I mean, they're in a foreign country and things aren't good. I mean, they're in their country and with the foreign people. And we would kid them because we had an outpost out. They couldn't take a turn on the radio or on the sound power telephone at night. So we had to send more GIs in. And the Korean, he'd go out there and he'd go to sleep. And as soon as the sun came up, why, he'd chop, have a yes. He wanted to go have breakfast. And he's had a good night's sleep, and the GIs out there were carrying the load. If something happened, he was there, and he would jump in and fight. We had a Korean assistant machine gunner, and we had a plan or a SOP, a normal operation, where before we'd fire the last belt, we'd let everybody know that was the last belt. And we were hit pretty hard one night, and this John, we called him John, I don't know what his Korean name was, but he had hooked the last belt and the preceding belt together, and the gunner had fired it. All of a sudden it quit firing, and I ran over, I said, "What, get this thing going?" I was upset because there was plenty of targets out there. And John looked up and he says, "Ammo, have a no." And we were out of ammo, but those things happen. He's a good man too. Everybody gets a little excited when things get tight, and we forgot to keep one belt back.
All right. And was it common to run out of ammunition? Was it common to run out of ammunition in those situations?
No. Occasionally we did, but that's when things don't go the way they're planned, or there's more of them than you thought there was. And of course, you're carrying a basic load, and most everybody carried a little more because nobody wanted to run out. But it was seldom. But when you did, it was tight.
Okay. Now, did you get any time off or in the rear during the course of that year?
Yeah, we would. First of all, we generally didn't want to go in the rear.
Okay.
Because you weren't drawing combat pay when you went in the rear, and you were doing menial tasks. You were digging trenches, or you were doing things that weren't there, and you were doing some training, tactical exercises and that type of thing. So, and you weren't getting as many points when you went to the rear. Why the number of points, and you had to have 40 to come home, and so if you went from 4 on the front line to 1 in reserve, why. No, let's stay up here and.
But they would rotate the units off the
Yeah,
line periodically.
You'd get a break.
Okay.
And we did, and they tried around Christmas time. They'd try to give everybody a break, but then you can't give everybody a break.
Yeah.
One thing around Christmas time, that the North Koreans put up a loudspeaker, and they were playing "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas," and then they'd say, "Attention, GI, come on over to our side. Tucks on," meaning a lot. Women and whiskey. And they played that, and everybody laughed. And we'd holler back, "Turn the music on and shut up," But we enjoyed the music. But, nobody went over to their side.
Okay. Now, in the Vietnam era, they had a regularly instituted kind of R&R system where men would get out. Now, did you have that when you were in Korea?
Yes, we did. Yes.
And so did you get an R&R?
I got an R&R to Japan, and then I was able to make a phone call to my family. 3 minutes we got, and that was it. But it was great, and we went up to Mount Fuji. They had a R&R hotel up there, and a big swimming pool, and there's a opportunity to drink probably a little more booze than what you should, but most people imbibed to some degree, and I was included. And then we went back, and we to show you how crazy we were. There was one officer from in the same company I was in, and a couple others from another battalion, but we were in our battalion, but not in this company. And it was time for us to go back. Well, 2 of these guys were West Pointers, and they were a classmate of the guy that was running the deal for sending you back. And so we went down, and they made it so we could get a couple more days. Well, before that kicked in, new R&R people from Korea came in, and they said our regiment was going back online. And so we said, "Oh, cancel that. We got to. If the regiment's going up, we can't take it like that." So we went back and went up with the regiment when they went. If it hadn't been that, we'd have played the game and tried to get an extra day or 2.
All right. Now, you get to the end then of your tour in Korea. You get back into the States in '53 before the armistice. Now, let's see, as an officer, now how many years was your initial enlistment supposed to be for?
As a, because I accepted the regular Army commission, I had a minimum of 3 years to serve, and then I could resign, but I didn't have a ETS, terminal service thing. I was a lifer. I was it. And when I started, I fully intended to resign after the 3rd year. I was at Fort Lewis, Washington, and I was debating with my wife and discussing whether we should do it or not, and decided to stay. And so I had to take no action on my part to resign. I actually had sent in a request for retirement, or for release from resign my commission, and it came back for some administrative thing was wrong, and I threw it away and never resubmit it. My grandmother at the time, when this was going on, she lived there in Olympia, which is short. And she says, "Bill, the only people stay in the Army are people that can't do anything else." Well, Grandma, and I stayed, and I had no regrets.
All right. And so what was it that kind of made you decide that this is really what you wanted to do?
I thought leading men was a lot like coaching, particularly in combat. I wanted to be a high school coach. I played football, and that's what I wanted to do. But I got in the Army, and I liked it. And I liked leading the troops and trying to be fair with them, and yet trying to hold a standard. And it just appealed, and to me it was very similar to coaching, particularly when you had to take a hill or something, and it's not normal to go up and have somebody shoot at you.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so you would come back, and you're based at Fort Lewis. Then how long do you wind up staying there?
3 years.
Okay.
After that, I went all that time at 3 years. I was a rifle company commander. Most of the time, 1 year, the regimental commander called me in and saw that I'd played football, and he says, "You're going to coach the regimental football team."
Okay.
And I said, "Sir, I can't. I'm a company commander." He says, "In 1930-something, I commanded 2 companies and coached the baseball team." He says, "You can coach the football team and command 1 company." So I did, and it's better I stayed in the Army because we didn't do well.
All right. And now, sort of after the when the war is over, there's not a shooting war going on. What sort of people were going into the Army just as enlisted men in those days?
Well, the draft was still on, and I would say they were just ordinary guys. There was a lot of talk about don't take a regular guy because he's enlisted because the sheriff told him to go in the Army or go someplace, and that's overstated. I mean, there was some of that, yes, and there were some guys that thought they could skate a bit, and then the draftees came in, and you had the range of draftees. Like I had a company clerk one time drafted, and he had been an associate professor of political science at the University of Kentucky. Well, boy, I used him in the orderly room, and he was doing all the writing for me. But that was an exception. But they were good kids, and if you treated them right, they'd do the job. And I can never criticize the general U.S. soldier. He's a good man.
Okay, so you're at Fort Lewis for 3 years, and what's your next assignment?
I went back to Fort Benning, the Army, they call it the career course, the advanced infantry officers course. And that's a 9-month school. And that's a good thing that the Army does. Is those schools that you're required to go as you go up the line, they coincide with the civilian school system. So your kids aren't jerked in and out of school when you're going. And that was made a big, like our oldest boy, we have 2 boys. And the oldest one was in 3 different first grades, but that's because of Korean getting ready to go and all that. After the oldest boy was in 2 high schools, the youngest one was in 1. And I forget, the rest of the moves were at summertime. And so it didn't affect their schooling. And that was a concern, that the kids, if they didn't adjust and couldn't handle it, then we were going to get out. But they did. And they both eventually came in later on.
All right. And so this, the school you're at Fort Benning, is this what kind of the transition from captain to major at this point?
Yes. It was to have you become a division staff officer. But of course they meant battalion instead of division because and it was a 9-month course and a lot of competition between your contemporaries because that all goes in your file, and when it comes time for promotion and good jobs and all, why it's to your advantage to pay attention and to do your best.
Okay.
And it was as I say, primary for battalion level and division staff.
So was this mostly classroom stuff? Or?
Yes, most of it classroom. There was a lot of practical and night problems and map reading and of course weapons firing and all that, but it was mostly classroom work.
Okay. Now, was this when you did the jump school, or did that come later?
Yeah, I went to when I completed that course, I went to jump school, and then my next assignment was an ROTC, and I asked for a preference because my father was dying of cancer at that time, and I asked if I could go back to the state of Washington, and they sent me back to my alma mater on ROTC duty after I finished jump school.
Okay.
And I was there for 3 years, and that was a kind of a rest after when you're in a training outfit in a training position. Your hours are terrible, and but that's the way it is.
Okay. But with the ROTC, I mean, these are people who are in classes, and so there's only certain hours and times and stuff that you're doing things.
You had to go to work at 8 o'clock and you're at home at 5, and we hadn't had that before.
Right. Okay. So when did you finish that?
The ROTC assignment in '60, and that's when I went to Ranger School. And I don't know how much you know about Ranger School, but it's tough. And I really like to talk about it because that's the only school that I ever attended that I was the honor graduate in. It didn't take anything up here. It was all, but they tried to teach you and show you that you can always do more than you think you can.
Okay.
And
yeah. Now, where did they do that? Or was there more than one place?
yeah, it started at Fort Benning, Georgia, and it went up in the mountains in Georgia, and then it went down the swamps in Florida or southern Georgia. Okay. And you were about 3 weeks in each place. It was an overall 9-week course.
Okay. And what was the point of having the different venues?
Oh, so you could get used to that kind of an environment to fight in. And it was all patrolling. That was their method of instructing you and whatever it was. And so you're always on patrol. You got 7 hours sleep a week. That's all. And you'd hallucinate. You'd get tired, and some guys just flop over. One night we stopped in the swamp, and we were in water thigh deep, been there for a day and a half, and with no sleep. And the only thing that kept me going is I'd get to betting with the guy alongside of me who's going to fall over first. And invariably, somebody standing up would fall asleep, standing up, bam, they'd go in the water, and then they'd come up with some expletives, deleted and spitting and coughing, and it was humorous to me, and that kind of helped me get through. The other guy was having trouble, and I was that's a bad way to do it, I guess, but that worked.
Okay, so you got the swamp training in Okefenokee Swamp, or wherever it is that they've got you. Dahlonega, Georgia, was that where you went for and that's mountain training?
That's the mountain training at Dahlonega, that's right. Okay. And the other 3 weeks were at Fort Benning.
All right. Now, what proportion of the people who started Ranger School actually finish?
Well, our class started with 225, and 83 of us finished. So we dropped a few.
Now, would some of those recycle and finish eventually, or were they just gone?
Oh, no, they were gone. If they were, some of them, if they were hurt or injured, they were gone also. But if they were out, they were gone. Now, in some instances, they would allow you to recycle. Most guys weren't going to put up with it. They had enough. And I'll be darned if I'm going to do it again, because it was tough. And physically and, as I say, mentally it was, other than to control yourself and to force yourself to do more. And it paid off. Those Rangers were good people, they still are good people. I'm sure they've changed the course many times since I was there, but in the fall of '60, that's when I graduated.
Okay. And having done that, now where do you go?
I went to Germany for 3 years, 3rd Armored Division, north of Frankfurt. We had the defensive sector just north of Frankfurt, and which generally the Fulda Gap, and we have to move up in there. And I was a rifle company commander most all the time. Just before I came home, I was promoted to major, and I became the operations officer for the Armor Brigade. But I spent all my time other than that, as a rifle company commander, and I had a good company, and it wasn't because of me. I had some great officers and enlisted men, non-coms, and everybody says they had the best. Well, we proved ours because every time we had a test, we had the highest one, and Abrams even came down and talked to us and told us we were, we had good morale.
Okay, so that's General Creighton Abrams, who later commands in Vietnam.
Yes, right.
And what was he doing at that time?
He was the division commander.
Okay.
Yeah, and we were just one of the 100 companies that made up the. I don't know how many companies make up the division.
All right. Now this is Cold War era, and you're there. If you're there, 60 to 63, there's some things going on with Berlin Wall and so
You
forth,
bet there
and missile
were.
crisis. And so when something bigger happened internationally, kind of what happens with you? Or
Well, you're immediately on alert, and because you didn't know what the Russians were going to do. The Berlin Wall, it was particularly important to me because that particularly night that they started that, my wife and children were in Berlin. No idea that was going to happen, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And her sister and husband were in Berlin. They were visiting. Well, he was called out, and he got a phone call to me. But we were on maneuvers out of Munich, out of Grafenwehr. Other guys probably mentioned that, and we had to get the division back up in position because we didn't know what was going on. And I got a hold of my brother-in-law, and I said, "Get my family out of there and send yours too, and we'll take care of them on this end." Well, he was trying, but he had some problems that he had to take care of because he was right there. And anyway, he got my wife and kids on the train, duty train that ran back and forth, and they came out with no incident. And we were, the rest of us in the 3rd Armored Division, the German government came through in fine style. They got 4 or 5 trains, just nothing but flat cars, and we could load all our tracked vehicles. And overnight, we were moving. And we had the right of way all the way through, and they flagged us right up into the area where we were, if we had to fight, we were there and ready. And the German government and railroad just really turned to on it. But they had a little incentive. They'd been through that before.
Yes. And that I've heard stories that if you're based near the Fulda Gap, people will tell you how long they expect you to hold out when the fighting starts. And what do they say to you?
I don't know that we had a period. We were supposed to hold as long as we could. Mm-hmm. And everybody knew we weren't going to hold forever. Because they had more tanks than we did, and they had more artillery. And of course, we had nuclear weapons, and we had the tactical nuclear weapons. We had the Honest John and the Davy Crockett, and I don't think much of that Davy Crockett. I think that was more of a hindrance than a good one. But and then we had the engineers had nuclear devices, but we had to put a hole in their scheme for a while. But I think eventually unless we could get something from the States in a hurry. We'd have fallen back a good bit, a good ways.
Okay. Now you mentioned that the West German government was certainly supportive when they needed to be. What kind of relationship was there between the German civilian population and the Americans?
Yeah, that was up and down and depended on who you talked to. And some of them hated us. Most of them liked us because we had the money and we were spending, and our economy was pretty good. We rented a house from a German for a while. And he was pretty brusque, but it was a business deal, and it was his house, and he was fair. The only thing is, he was using my oil, but and he was selling it to other people. But that was all right. It was kind of accepted, but they were generally good. We became very good friends, and still are. Well, they both died now, but good friends with the German couple. They came over here, and they're both buried in Oregon, but. They were real. He was in the German army, and when I was there, I tried to find German civilians that were you in the German army? No, we couldn't find anyone. I go, who are our guys fighting? None of them wanted to admit that they had been in the service, and they all of age were, and I didn't see any animosity. There was some, I'm sure, but we got along, I thought, very well with them.
Well, they probably had a reasonable sense of, okay, if it's you or the Soviets, you look pretty good.
Yeah, that's what I think. That was the big incentive.
All right. So there was excitement at the time of the Berlin Wall, but you're still there when the Cuban Missile Crisis happens. Does that repeat itself then, or is it not as big a deal?
It was a big deal. And we were all restricted to the post. Of course, we were at our post when it started. And we all came in. We had a housing area about 3 miles away, but came in and we, of course, checked all the equipment, make sure. We had some units that had dispersed into assembly areas outside in case. And it was a tight, tense time. But we felt better about it then than we did with the Berlin Wall. We felt that if something happened, we were better prepared and we could handle it much better than when the Berlin Wall went up.
Is that because you'd been through it before, or because you were in position?
Both. And I think in our case, we'd been through it. And of course, all units were all continually rotating, and not everybody had been through it, but that was part of it, yeah. And I don't think it was if it started, it would start away, and we'd have a little more time to react if something did happen. And that's why I think it was. We were concerned. I'm not trying to play it off, but it was not as tense for a few moments as the first one was.
Okay. And how long do the sort of the crisis mode last?
Oh boy, it depends on I guess the world situation. I would guess probably 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, and then things would start easing up, or decisions had been made, and you could see pretty well that nothing was going to really happen right now, and if it did, we were still quasi-ready. You didn't really let go all the time. We'd have monthly alerts, unannounced, and you could sometimes G2 it and find out when, and I didn't. I never wanted to. Not that I was anything special, but I wanted my company to be able to react, and so we never tried it. We played it for real. When that horn sounded, we were going.
Now, in the back of your mind, I don't know whether you even thought about it this way, did you figure that you'd probably be able to get through your tour without anything big happening, or did you really think that this could really blow up?
Yeah. I think we thought we could get through with it. I know we were sure hoping we did. But at the same time, we were quite confident. We did a lot of training, we kept track for a while. I was gone 9 months of the year from our quarters over there, and that was an accompanied tour.
Yeah.
So we were hitting the ball pretty hard, and we felt, I guess, maybe even a little bit cocky that, hey, we're pretty good. We know how to hit the target, and we can shoot, move, and communicate, and we would have put up a good fight.
All right. Now, when does the tour in Germany actually end?
For me, it ended in June 1963. The day President Kennedy came over is the day my family and I went home. And, of course, that was a big day.
Yeah.
And I was in on the preparation for him when he came over and some of the things. But, no, we came home. And my assignment then, I was a student at the Command General Staff College. A 9-month course, and that's a selective thing. And you, at that level, very few will get promoted if you don't go to the...
Right. And where do they hold that college?
Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
Okay.
And from a family assignment, and all the time that I served, that was the best family assignment we had. The hours were, as a student,
Yeah.
and you had no weekends, no night problems or anything, and it was a good break in a career for their family to get together again.
Okay. And this is the step to move to lieutenant colonel then?
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
okay. And of course, as you do this, fewer and fewer people
Yes.
get to make those steps
Yeah.
at that point. Okay. Now, so you were there when President Kennedy was assassinated.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
what,
right.
What happened where you were after that news came out?
Oh, wow. We were in class, and they immediately stopped all classes, and they shut down the officers' club, no parties, big deal. But it was appropriate, I thought, deal of mourning, and yet it was a military type thing. And I thought everybody behaved themselves exceptionally well, and I think everybody was just shocked, couldn't believe that had happened. And I thought it was great that they shut the school down for the rest of the week. I forgot what day of the week it was, but it was shut down. And again, any festivity that was planned for that weekend was canceled. And it was a day, a very somber day. Everybody took heart, and everybody felt that there was a great loss. Whether you were a Democrat or Republican, that didn't enter. You were a soldier. And it was a sobering time.
Okay. But of course, since none of you were assigned to units at that point, you're not going on alert or whatever because there's no place to be or nothing to do as far as that goes.
No.
Okay. Now, at the same time this is going on, this is also right around the same time when the president of Vietnam is assassinated and the Vietnam situation is kind of deteriorating. Now, during the course of your time, say when you're in Germany and then you're back at Leavenworth and so forth, were you paying attention to that
Oh,
at
yes.
that point?
And a lot of our classes were oriented that way. We were trying to keep up with it, and they'd have speakers in, and you'd have a few classmates that had come back from there, and that was a big step up to hear from them and what's going on over there, and how it's going on. And
because we'd had quite a few people over there in different capacities in South Vietnam, and we had special forces types in Laos and other things like that.
Yeah.
At that point too.
And what the thing that amazed me, in addition to that, we had special forces down in South America, and I didn't realize that, and I thought, oh, I'm a professional Army man, I know everything that's going on. Well, I didn't know a darn thing about it. It's bigger than you think it is.
Okay.
I hope it's going that way today too.
Okay, and then when do you finish the school at Leavenworth?
That 63, June 63.
That's when you would have gotten there.
Wait a minute.
When do you finish?
64.
64.
64.
Okay.
And my assignment then was 6th Army Headquarters at San Francisco in the Operations G3 section. And that's the only job I've had in the Army where I just could not get along with my boss.
Okay.
And so I was there for a year and not doing well. And it's not his fault. I mean, it's my job to do it. And I thought better, so I volunteered to go to Vietnam.
Okay.
And my wife didn't appreciate that.
I'm sure. But okay. Now, what was the nature of the job that you were doing in San Francisco?
Just a staff officer pertaining to reserve components. And we would go out and inspect reserve components at their summer training, and I was responsible for inspecting the division. And I flunked them. They were, in my opinion, no good. Well, I didn't realize there was politics involved.
Oh.
And I shouldn't have flunked them. And I was asked to redo it, and I said, I can't. And so then things went downhill from there. So I volunteered to go to Vietnam.
Okay. And now what assignment do you get in Vietnam?
Initially, I was a staff officer, and I didn't like that. I said, I'm a troop commander, and I'm not a staff officer, and I want to get out. And it took a while, but I was released, and I was assigned to the Ranger Command.
Okay. Now, were you making that fuss after you were in Vietnam, or did you do all this and get that assignment before you left?
No, I didn't have I didn't know what my assignment was before I left, and I did it when I was in Vietnam.
Okay. Now, do you do any kind of preparation or training or anything before you go to Vietnam?
Oh yeah, I went to the MATIC course, military advisor training something in Fort Bragg, and they try to teach you some of the culture, a smattering of the language, and their organization militarily, and then the climate in the country itself. It was a short, I don't know, I'd say maybe a month. I honestly don't remember. It was at Fort Bragg.
Okay.
And then I went from there, instead of Vietnam, then they sent me to the Army Language School. And there's kind of a little story I tell there. Before I left Germany, Army-wide, they gave all the officers a language aptitude test. And I think out of 100, I think I got 18. I had to have no aptitude at learning. As a matter of fact, I flunked Spanish in high school. But when I got there and they were going to send me to language school, I said, wait a minute. I said, I didn't pass that. And the guy says, Alverson, you're going to Vietnam whether you pass that course or not. Well, I'm fine. I volunteered to go. But so I took the course. They said I passed it, but I don't think anybody flunked it. Mm-hmm. And I could speak a little. I could speak, put the machine gun over here in the direction of fire and that kind of stuff. But I couldn't go to town and order a bouquet of roses or something like that. I could speak enough. I understood enough military jargon that in one briefing over there in Vietnam, once I got there, a Vietnamese officer was criticizing me. And he didn't think that I could understand. Well, I couldn't understand much of it, but I know he wasn't talking complimentary.
Yep.
And so I approached him. And it was a bad deal because you save face is a big thing. But he didn't talk against me in public. Again, he might have on his own, probably did, and probably with reason.
All right. Now, how long is the language school?
I'm sorry?
How long did the language school take?
It was a short one, 6 weeks.
Okay.
If you're going there to learn the language, it's like a year, and you really learn it. And but I knew in 6 weeks that it was a lost cause.
Kind of a smattering and
Yes.
a little bit that
And
had some value.
when I got to Vietnam, we landed in Tan Son Nhut at night and on the bus, and I told the guys, "Hey, I can talk to the driver, the Vietnamese driver. I'll tell him something." And I tried to say something in perfect English. He turned back to me, "When were you in Hanoi?" I had a Hanoi accent. my instructor was from Hanoi. I didn't know I had an accent. And
Well, there, you had some aptitude after all.
yeah, right.
All right. So basically, the way this works is then you've done the language school and so forth, and then you fly over. And was this a chartered aircraft or?
Yeah, no, it was military.
Okay, it was military.
Yeah. When we came home the last time, I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, that's everybody was leaving and they were scrambling to get aircraft to get us out of there by midnight on the 29th. And I came home on a Braniff 747. And I was a colonel by that time, and I was the senior officer on it, and so they put us up in that little cupola. And I'd never been in first class section in my life, and here I'm up there, and the stewardess said, "That's a military charter, and we can't serve alcohol." I said, "I understand that. That's fine." She says, "But if you won't tell anybody," I said, "Honey, I'm not telling anybody anything." And she brought out a big bottle of champagne, and there was about 6 of us up there, and we had a little toast to Vietnam. Not enough to do anything, but it was a...
Okay, but the way over, military aircraft, whatever, go to Tan Son Nhut. So when do you actually arrive in Vietnam?
I arrived in Vietnam. Oh, I don't know why I can't remember it. Let's see if I wrote it down here. Oh, I know. It was on the first part of January '66, like I would say the 8th or 10th of January '66 is when I got there.
Okay. Now, when you get to Tan Son Nhut, a bus takes you someplace, then what happens to you?
We kept in a hotel down there for a couple of 3 days processing, and then they cut orders, and that's why I was assigned to that staff job. Then I got out of that staff job, and my duty station was Pleiku up in the Central Highlands.
Okay. So how long did you have to wait before you got that assignment?
Oh, maybe 3 weeks.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I was working. I was a staff officer and tally, and I mean, I was doing flunky work.
Okay, but where was that?
At Tan Son Nhut.
Okay, so you kind of hadn't really gone anywhere yet.
Yeah.
Okay, but now you go up to Pleiku and you're with the Rangers. Okay.
Yeah.
How did they get you up there?
Helicopter all the way.
Okay.
And of course, the pilots, they like to give you a show when they know you're a new guy, and they were down this high off the ground, and we were chasing cows, and they were having a big time. And I was still concerned. I'm looking to see where's the bad guys. Anybody going to take a shot at us and that kind of stuff. But it was got to be fun. And I don't know, maybe an hour and a half, and we were in Pleiku.
Okay. Now, describe the job then once you're in Pleiku?
Okay, I was an advisor to this task force. I accompanied them on operations. I was the key for calling in artillery and air support. I shouldn't say key. I was able to get it for them, and we had each battalion had a U.S. advisory team with them.
Right.
And I went out when the task force went out with the commander, and he didn't appreciate. I mean, he was the commander, and he was going to command it, and it took me a while to understand that some of my input wasn't he didn't care for, but it was his outfit, and it took a while. Finally, I got it, and we became good friends, and we would work together. And if we had time, normally they didn't have any time to prepare. It was bam, go, and they'd try to plan on the way. And another thing that made it bad at that time, and I don't know how it is now, but at that time they were using the Rangers as a dumping ground for their officers who were not cutting the mustard. And so you didn't have the best officer. Even the enlisted men would come up and say, "Why don't you take over? You not because it was me, but just any American. You take over. We'll follow you, and you know more about than what." And their officers were pretty bad. One of them, as an example, nothing tactically, but we'd been marching. It was hot, and we weren't in the jungle. We were out in the open area, and they took a break. And this officer, the captain, called a private over so he could lean on him. just, and everybody's hot and sweaty and sticky, and he wanted somebody to lean on, so he had a prize. You know how far that'd go in our army.
Well, what was sort of the nature of the missions that they carried out?
Oh, mostly small raids. We'd try to hit a supply depot, or we think we knew where a VC unit was encamped, and we tried to make a raid in there and do some damage to them. Once in a while you'd catch them. Most of the time you didn't. And then we'd be in their area, and then you had to be more careful. You had to keep your security up, and they had a way of keeping their security up is that they had geese, and they'd tie them on their back, and they'd put a reed down their throat so they couldn't make noise, and then at night they'd tether them out there, and nobody ever snuck up on us. The geese, you hear the geese moving or making noise, and you better make sure you know where your pistol or your rifle is.
Okay. What was the area like, just geographically, that you were operating in?
Most of it was mountainous, and that was a plus, really, because we were in some low areas, rice paddies and that type of thing, but in two corps mostly mountainous, and that's where we were. And you had to hump a little bit, but I would prefer to be in the mountains than in the swamps.
So you weren't at least sitting in mud all the time?
No.
All right. And I guess one of the things that I'd heard or read about the Vietnamese Army was that there was a real gap between the officers and the enlisted men. The enlisted men and the regular units kind of had to like even provide their own food or something like that.
Oh, yes. It went even further than that. If a soldier was wounded, his family had to go to the hospital. And I made a point of trying to visit the Vietnamese Rangers that if they were in a hospital. And I'd never seen such a thing. They put two guys in the same bed, feet to feet, but and the families are sitting in the corner, and the families had to provide the food. They'd cook in the room. Oh, you can imagine the smell in the room, and how anybody got out of there without dying of some kind of poisoning, I don't know. But yeah, it was a big difference, and I felt sorry for them.
All right. Now, how frequently would you go on raids while you're with them?
Well, sometimes we thought more than we should. No, that was our job, and I would say, we didn't go on them. Maybe I'll tell you, maybe once a month, and then you'd hit 2 or 3 in a row, and then it would be nothing for a while.
And then what were you doing the rest of the time?
Trying to talk them into training, and they didn't have to train because they were already trained and they knew how to do this and that. And like I say, any similarity between those Rangers and our Rangers is coincidental.
Yeah. I mean, there were other Vietnamese who were used in sort of the smaller recon teams and things like that. And that was a whole different operation.
Yeah,
from
different. I didn't have any. I knew they were there. I didn't have any contact with them.
But they also operated outside of Vietnam, and you were in it because you could, as an American officer, you could go with them and all of that kind of thing and do that. Now, when you made the raids, did they walk? Did they go by helicopter? Or?
Both.
Okay.
Both. We preferred, of course, to go by helicopter. But sometimes you'd be helicopter in and have to walk out, and that was a tough deal, particularly if you had wounded and something. But the helicopters, most of the helicopter support was U.S. provided.
Right.
Occasionally, Vietnamese. They'd take a siesta during the lunch period, and if they had a wounded guy down, the Vietnamese helicopter just would not go until siesta time was over. And we were reluctant to call, but if the guy's going to die, you got to do something. And our guys would come. Our dust off, boy, I'm telling you, they're fantastic. That med-vac helicopter. We had guys down, and we were still fighting over this piece of ground, and the helicopter was monitoring our freak, and he said, "You got a GI down?" An affirmative. "Oh, I'm coming in." I said, "No, don't come in. We don't own it yet. We're still deciding who owns this. If you got a GI down, we're coming." And they came in, and the co-pilot took around through his forearm, didn't hit a bone, fortunately, but that's what they would do. And I have the greatest respect for those guys. I'm telling you, they fantastic, and they'd do it, come in, pick up an ARVN. Vietnamese, if they could do it. But,
all right. And then, how much actual fighting did you get into when you're doing this?
Well, more than I thought I would. I was a major at the beginning of the time, and I really didn't expect to get into any real fighting. but when you're in a Ranger unit, why, you do. And we did. And when we go on the raids and all, the first one I was on, I was briefed that a friendly unit was going to join us on our right flank when we came into this, cleared this village. And I should have known when we went into the village there was no kids or dogs out. And I didn't pick that up, and I should have. And so when we came out the other side, we were ambushed. And I thought at first it was friendly fighting friendly. It even had uniforms that looked like Arvin, and they weren't. And before we figured it out, I jumped up and I said, "Come on, don't shoot, we're friends." And the guy next to me, not American, but a Vietnamese, took 4 in the chest and he was down. And they pulled me down, and one of the, Arvin said, Major Tuta, "You're telling them to shoot your friend on the table." B-A-N, ban can be to shoot or table or friend. And this is the inflection, and I can't sing, and so I don't carry a tune, and I couldn't speak the language. So they said, you let us do the talking. But it got to be exciting at times.
Okay, you get into the ambush. How do you get out of it?
That's the key. You have to overcome it. You have to either maneuver or get more fire in, or maybe get artillery or airstrike or something like that. And you have to be aggressive. You can't sit there. If the longer you sit, the worse it gets. So you've got to, if you can't get artillery air in there, you've got to start maneuvering. Mm-hmm. And of course, under fire, it's a little more difficult to maneuver. And then how do you get if the Vietnamese aren't going to do it, you're with them, and you're bending his ear all you can to maneuver right or left or do something and hang on. I'm trying to get air or artillery in, and you hope that they run out of ammunition before you do.
So how did the soldiers themselves actually perform?
The Vietnamese soldiers?
Yeah.
I'd say like you expect with the officers they had. Some of them were excellent, and the most were less than excellent. And there were some that just, in fact, some of them you weren't sure whether they were on your side or not. Mm-hmm. And you had occasion where you had a strong suspicion that, and particularly if you were in particularly the Special Forces guys. But if they knew you and you'd been with them a while, they were great. If they didn't, then you better be careful.
Now, as you kind of developed a working relationship with the commander and they got to know you, did you notice any change in terms of what happened in the field, or was it pretty much the same the whole time?
Oh, a little bit of change. And he was still the boss, and rightfully so. I wished he would have been a little, but he probably wished I'd have shut up a little bit more. But we were cordial. We weren't real tight or close, but we were not enemies, or we didn't try to deliberately foul the other guy up. We tried to do it right, and he did too.
And did you have any situations where you got into it and wondered if you were going to get out?
A time or two, yes, yeah. Ambush, but most of the time, well, the closest was, and fortunately for us, it was close to the build-up area of Pleiku. Mm-hmm. They had come in, and they had us. We hadn't been alert, and we weren't deployed like we should have. And I think they ran out of ammunition. Mm-hmm. And it lasted, for about 3 or 4 hours, and then they gradually got out. But
if you got into trouble, was it possible to call in reinforcements from anywhere, or just artillery, or
just artillery or air? Mm-hmm. The Vietnamese, at least now, and every place is different in Vietnam. Sometimes maybe they had a reserve. We didn't have any, and that could react in that time. Unless if an American unit was by,
right,
they might. But they generally had their hands full, and there was some resentment with the American unit and the Vietnamese, and I think rightfully so, because the Vietnamese did not perform as well. They didn't have the assets, they didn't have the communication, the mobility that the U.S. had, and some U.S. looked down on them, and some advisors got to think that their Vietnamese outfit were really strack and really good. I never saw one that was really good. I saw some. We had, out of 3 battalions, we had 1 battalion commander that was a good battalion commander. in my opinion. And again, who am I to judge? That was my
You've
job.
seen a lot of commanders.
Yeah, I'd seen and worked for quite a few. But so they were generally subpar.
Okay. Now, did you spend most of your time then kind of on a base in Pleiku? or-
Yes. They had that's another interesting thing compared to us. They had a area where their base was, and it was huts and stuff, and their families were there with them. And when you're out, even sometimes they'd bring families out with them because they didn't know if you were going to come back there or which way, and they didn't want to be separated. Well, then, as soon as the Viet Cong found out where the families were, they'd attack through the families. And that's an interesting situation. It's a terrible situation because you can't shoot in there. You're going to kill your own people.
Yeah.
And that was a tough thing with the news people. They say we're killing women and children. Well, when they attack through there, yeah, some of them are going. We were on a rice paddy and we drew fire from a little village. Well, when you draw fire, you return it. And we returned it and attacked through the village. All the men were gone, and there was, I don't know, 6 or 8 women and children that were hit. And obviously we hit them. And the news said, we're out there wantonly killing women and children. And that I lost a lot of respect for our news people over there. A lot of respect.
All right. Now, over the course of your time there, basically it's most of the year 1966, right? So you're there almost
All
the whole
60 came home on Christmas Day.
Right. Okay. Did you have any kind of sense of what direction the war was going? Were things the same when you left as when you got there? Or?
I honestly thought it was going our way. I thought that we were winning. I didn't have any feel for an end as to when it would end. And I get on the edge of politics. I'm not a big proponent of that. And I think that hurt us more than anything. I think we could have done it quicker. But I'm not up at that level, and that was it.
But basically, kind of from where you were in terms of what was going on in the area that you were in and what your unit was encountering, you were certainly holding your own.
We were holding our own, and I thought we were making headway.
Okay.
And maybe that's just bravado, or but I really did.
Okay. Now, did they give you an R&R while you were in Vietnam?
Yes, they did. And I got to go to Hawaii. I met my wife in Hawaii, and we were there for 5 days and came back. And
So what's it like to go back to Vietnam at that point?
it was bad. It was terrible. And a war story. I was, of course, in a Class A uniform. No boots, no canteen, no weapon. And I hitched a ride with the L-19 from Pleiku. At that time, I was down in Phan Thiet, down still in Tu Corps, but on the
other end, yeah.
and on the coast. And we had to go across the mountains to get down there. And we just crossed the mountains, and the airplane started running rough. And I didn't know the pilot. I mean, he didn't. And of course, we were talking. He was an American, and he said, "What's the matter with this thing?" And he worked the stuff up there, and he got it going. And then it would quit. And so I'm started looking around and trying to find the drainage, which way the drainage going, where's south and north, and where we had the Viet Cong plotted when I left from R&R, because we were flying over the same deal. And pretty soon I could see our base up on the horizon, and he got it going, and we made it to the base. And then he said, the pilot said, "I want to fly around a little bit to see if I can." I said, "Hey, buddy, you put this thing on the ground, and I'm getting out, and you can fly it any place you want." So we went down, and I got out, and I don't know, and I guess it was just something in the gas line. Probably something very minor, but I thought it was pretty major for just coming back from R&R and welcome back to the bush.
All right. Now, once you get back from Vietnam from that first tour, then where are you assigned?
I was, let me think here. I gotta look. You get old and your memory's not that good.
Well, do you get another school in there somewhere? Or?
I went back and that's when I was an instructor at the Conventional Staff College. Yes, I was sent back. I thought originally I was going to go to Hawaii, and they were forming the 11th Brigade there. And I wrote home and told the boys to get their surfboard. And about a week later, my wife got a letter from the commandant, the wife of Leavenworth. We'd served with them before, and they welcomed us to Leavenworth. That they're going to be a staff and faculty. It showed my wife knew more about it than I did.
Okay. Now, and then how long did you do that job?
3 years.
Okay.
And my subject area at that time was Vietnam and internal defense, we call it. It's a whole lot like fighting terrorism and same kind of thing, only the surge and same tactics, I'm sure, that they're doing now. And that was, it was, again, a good assignment.
Okay, and there now you're training people. These would have been experienced officers who were coming into this school, so most of them would have been to Vietnam already.
Oh yeah, they all had been to Vietnam.
So could they teach you things that you didn't know?
Oh sure, oh yeah, and they loved that. You know, there's a little give and take against the instructors and so on. And I jump ahead just a little bit. At the end of the class year, there's a team from Washington that comes down, and they come from career management, and we all called it career manglement. They mangle your career, but anyway, and they tell you how you're doing in relation with your, and this was for the class, in relation with their contemporaries, what they needed for assignments, and then they'd give them their orders. And they do the same thing for departing faculty. And when it came my turn to depart, they came down, and I was upset because they didn't have any information for me about me. And I was talking to the lieutenant colonel that was on the team, and I tell him that I thought he was wasting taxpayers' money. Why didn't you do the job and all? I get tapped on the shoulder, and it's the team chief from the Pentagon that's there, a full colonel. I was a half lieutenant colonel. And he says, well, Colonel, what do you expect when you're at the apex of a mediocre career? And you talk about letting the air out of my sails. And so I went back to teach a class that afternoon. And I relayed that story to him. I said, your instructor is at the apex of a mediocre career. And of course, they got a snort out of that.
All right. That's a time when a lot of stuff goes on in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
You have some large campaigns in '67. You got the Tet Offensive and all of that stuff, and the follow-up offensives in '68. And then, of course, you also have Johnson going out, and you have Nixon coming in, and this sort of stuff. What kind of perception did you have of all of that, or what stood out to you in terms of how you understood what was happening?
Well, I guess I was kind of fed up with it. I felt like that the powers that be and the country they didn't know what they wanted to do. And they were just wasting people. If we're going to do it, let's do it. Otherwise, halt the bombing. Why do you halt the bombing in a war, for crying out loud? If you got them between a rock and a hard place, you keep them there. And it just, it irritated me. And I spoke out about it, and I was cautioned to keep my thoughts to myself. But I was disappointed. But
and I don't know, what impression did you have of Nixon at the point when he came in?
You know, knowing everything about him, I thought he did a good job. Now, he was dishonest, and I don't know that he was any more dishonest than anybody else about the Watergate break-in and that kind of stuff, particularly today. But I thought his foreign policy, I thought he had the right idea. I thought he was better than Johnson. And I said, I voted for him. And I said I'd vote for him again, even knowing the way things turned out. In regards to Vietnam and that, I thought he was right.
Yeah. Although when you look at the politics of it, he was playing a lot of interesting games with that too.
Oh yeah.
Different things going on. But one of the things that does happen, of course, also is you get a change in command at the top. And Creighton Abrams, a man that you had known from Germany, or at least he was commander then, comes in and takes over from Westmoreland. And do you think that was a useful move?
Yes, I do. I think I was a supporter of Westmoreland early on, and I think he just was there too long. And I think and this is terrible, but I think he did a poor job the longer he was there. And you know, I'm just a little guy looking up, and I'm not accurate on that. But I thought when he went in there, and when I first ran into him over there, I was impressed with him. I thought he knew what he was doing, and trying to do it right. And in fact, when he came into my area, he knew more about it than I did, and that was embarrassing. That's not going to happen again. But I'd only been there a couple of weeks, but I'd better get up to speed in a hurry. And he was knowledgeable.
So you actually come out, so like you would have to do briefings for him or something
No.
like that, or he would just...
If he came in,
Yeah.
if he came to our area, I did.
Yeah.
But I never went to his
Right.
headquarters or anything like that. And he wasn't interested in what I had to say, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He'd heard it all before.
All right. And then, of course, you're also now getting, I mean, the people you're teaching, I mean, they're coming back from Vietnam, and they've been in the middle of all of this kind of
Yeah.
thing and so forth.
And it was interesting, the discussions, because everybody at that time, everybody in Vietnam, it depended on where you were, as what was going on. And of course, you're an expert in where you were, but the guy right over here, he said, no, that's not the way it is at all. It was different over here. And once I got to where I realized that, then it was kind of interesting. And then you kind of egg them on a little bit to get the discussion going. But no, it was everybody, in a sense, it was the same, but specifically it wasn't.
Okay. Now, did you expect to have to go back to Vietnam for another tour?
I did, and I did. After I left the instructor tour there, I took command of a Special Forces training battalion at Bragg, and I was there just for a year and a half, and that's when the volunteer army was coming in. And I objected to the way that we were trying to bring it in. I thought we were trying to buy people, and I don't believe you can buy people. I still don't. But we were making concessions, and as a result, we were lowering, in my opinion, our military ability. And I said that this is the time to raise the standards. Are you good enough to be a volunteer soldier in the United States Army? And I had some opposition at a senior level with that. As an example, they wanted to put beer in the mess hall. They thought that was a deal. That's a terrible thing. And then how are you going to put it in there? Well, we'll put a machine in there, and they'll have to pay $1. I said, if you're going to put it in there, make it affordable to them. And what would you do? I said, well, first of all, I wouldn't put it in, but if you're going to put it in, draft beer. Give them a mess hall glass of beer, 10 ounces, for 10 cents. And, well, some guy, whiz bang, figured out that we'd make a profit if we did that, of 3 cents a glass or 2 cents a glass. And what are you going to do with the profit? I said, we'll have free beer one night a month. And it didn't work. And anyway, they finally did allow, at that time, the battalion was responsible for a consolidated mess. There was about 15 or 20 consolidated messes at Bragg, and this was the only one that had beer in it, and draft beer. And it turned out that the only ones that were appreciated were the senior NCOs. The privates wanted soda pop, and the old married guys wanted beer, and then the wives complained because the guys were drinking in the mess hall before they came home. Anyway, we had appearance, and I just thought we should hold a higher standard. We had.
Okay, because one of the things about it, I mean, this is an area, they've gone to the all-volunteer army, and that's a response to hostility to the draft and all of that kind of thing, which was a big issue. So you deflate some of that, and so it's a political move in that sense. But it was also a period when, I mean, I was not quite old enough to have to worry about it yet, but I was getting there. I didn't know a whole lot of people who wanted to go into the military.
Yeah, that's right. There weren't that many, but there was always those that were coming in. And I thought the more attractive it was from, are you good enough, then we get more. Obviously, I was wrong, but that's the way I thought it should go. And I spoke out about that.
And but was the quality of the actual recruits coming in, I mean, was it now below the level that you would have gotten if you had been drawing in draftees, or could you not tell?
I thought it was about the same.
Okay.
The soldiers we had at Bragg, most of those were motivated anyway to go special forces.
Yeah.
So I'd say we had a better cut to begin with. And however, some of them found that they could get away with things that, and I just thought that was wrong. They were up there, and the special forces was supposed to be an elite unit. Well, then let's make it elite. And if you're not good enough, you can't have the break. And it's interesting that I never went to Special Forces school.
Right.
I was not a Green Beret. And as a fact, we had a parade, and I was commander of troops, and the uniform was with a beret. Well, I didn't wear a beret. I wore overseas cap. And afterwards, the general in charge called me over after you turn parade's complete. Alverson, come up here. what have you got on your head? I said, sir, I've got an overseas cap. But you're supposed to ask, sir, I don't believe in wearing anything I didn't earn. And he had a beret on, and I knew he didn't earn his.
Ooh.
And that was not the comment to make. But I wasn't the commander of troops anymore after that either.
All right. So how did you wind up with the assignment to go back to Vietnam? And
I came out on the list for 06 to become a colonel.
Mm-hmm.
And because of my problem at Bragg, and I was not a popular 06,
Mm-hmm.
or a lieutenant colonel, and I thought that they might remove me from the list. They did not, and the general I had trouble with, I tell everybody, he was nicer to me than I would have been to him had the situation been turned around.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't take me off. Well, branch, I happen to have a friend at Colonel's branch, and as soon as you're on the list, all your records go up to Colonel branch. And a guy that I had served with before was up in the office, and I called him one day, and he congratulated me about making the list and all. And I said, well, what's my assignment? He said, well, we got all assignments are made for that list. They make your assignment right then, as soon as you make the list. Well, I hadn't gotten mine. He said, well, everybody has. Well, let me check on it. He called me back in a week. He says, what did you do? And I said, well, obviously I did enough to not get any orders yet. And he said, well, see what I can do. I said, you're telling me after 30 years that I'm no good? He said, I didn't say that. You did. He said, I'll call you back. And then he called back in a couple of days and he said, have you ever thought about going to graduate school? And I said, yeah, about 10 years, and they said I was too old. I said, Ron, I haven't got any, don't give me that baloney. He said, would you go? I said, sure. He says, well, you get yourself admitted someplace and we'll send you. And so I went to graduate school at Washington State, where I'd done, and I had to go, the track coach was still there, the one that I had, and I called him because my lower graduate grades weren't all that red hot. And I said, I need some, he said, I need some help. He said, I know you need something or you wouldn't have called, because I hadn't talked to him since I left. I said, I need some help getting into graduate school. He says, forget it. Anyway, he says, I'll see what I can do. And he said, I'll get you on probation. So that was enough. And that was all I needed.
so what program did you go into?
Guidance and counseling.
Okay.
And the Army thought I should because I was too tough or rigid or not compassionate. And they thought it would help. And I finished, got it, and I was on straight A's all the time when I was there. Of course, I think everybody in graduate school, I think they want to keep you in there. But anyway, I got it, and my reward was I didn't have any orders again. And I called, and I said, hey, I graduate in 2 weeks, and where am I going? So we came by and said, well, your next assignment will be as a logistician in Vietnam. I said, I'm not a logistician. I don't know anything about it. I'm a troop commander. Colonel, that's your assignment. And I said, all right, when and where do I report? And he put his hand over the telephone and he hollered at somebody and said, he's going to take it. And I said, listen, you turkey, you're not running me out of this Army. I'll get out when I get ready. And I'm not ready to get out yet. And I'm a soldier, and if that's my job, I'm going to do it and do the best I can. So I went to Vietnam as a logistician and airbase commander, Army Airbase field commander, and in Can Tho down in the Delta. And
Now, can you explain for an outside audience what exactly is a logistician?
yeah, well, it's a guy that handles all of the supplies, from gasoline to food to ammunition to clothing, and you see that they get from the warehouse to the guy that's supposed to have
Does
it.
it also involve moving people or just stuff?
Mostly just stock. Occasionally, you have to provide transportation. See that if there's a big unit or something they can't do with their organic stuff, or then somebody in a logistical situation will come up with the necessary transportation.
Okay. And you were also a base commander at that point.
Yes.
When you're Army Airbase, what kind of?
Mostly
Stuff
L-19s, helicopters, and a few classified as a twin engine capability of aerial reconnaissance and that type of thing. And that's where I got most of my information. Those guys come up and tell me, like they came up and tell me when the treaty was signed, and I didn't know that. And anyway, it was.
All right. Now you're down Mekong Delta area, and Can Tho is a larger town in that area.
Yes.
Now, were you out side of the city someplace, or?
Yeah, we were right on the edge of it. In
Okay.
fact, just to tell you a little war story about it, they brought a Vietnamese Ranger battalion in and put them on the periphery of the airfield, and we had lights, perimeter lights all the way around, which I didn't like because there's our target there. But anyway, that was it, and our generators started working way overtime. We had 5 great big diesel generators in the shack, and I had an NCO that took care of that. He said, "Sir, you better come up here. We're not putting out enough power, and they're just lugging them down." And so I knew the Rangers. I knew what kind of people they were, and I went over there, and sure enough, they'd tapped into all our power lines. And I asked a Vietnamese guy about, "Oh no, we wouldn't do that." And I said, "Okay." So I waited a couple of days, and I asked the local province chief to come over for dinner this night, and I had it set up with the NCO, and we had dinner and a couple of drinks. And come on, let's go on. I'll show you what your town looks like with the lights and all from here. And then we got up on top of the shack where the generators were, and we were standing up and say, "Oh, it's pretty out there." And I hollered out, "Sergeant Jones, shut off number 1." And that one part of town went dark. I said, "Turn it on," and it goes back up. I shut number 4 down, and it went down, and same thing. And I looked at the Vietnamese. I said, "Your power out there seems to be going on and off." And he turned around and he walked away, and he never came back. And our power went up.
All right, because when you mentioned tapping into the power, I mean, my initial response was to think that, okay, somehow these guys had gotten a bunch of electrical appliances as the soldiers were using it, but no, they were tapping in to feed to the town.
Yes, they were selling it.
Instead, and selling
Yeah.
it. Okay.
And anyway, it was a deal. I don't know much time.
Well, okay, well, I mean, I've got other things that I can ask you about this. Okay. Now, first of all, just when did you get there?
I got there in, why can't I even remember this? This just happens when you get old.
Because what, the summer of 72?
Summer of 70, yeah, it was like August of 72.
Okay.
And yes, because then the drawdown, and we had to be out of there by March 73.
All right. Now, we had been drawing down troops in increments for several years by this time. Now, what did you have in terms of assets or personnel or manpower when you got there? And then?
Well, all we had was a Air Cav Squadron, which is, when I say all, that's pretty significant. They can move, shoot, and communicate, and they can cover a big area. And that's what we had, plus what ARVN was in the area. There was a ARVN Division in the area. And we didn't see much of them. They were out, and we would provide, before the drawdown, we would provide helicopter lift and to help them. But after the drawdown, most of our helicopter left, and all we had left was the Cav Squadron and the organic aircraft to them. And then they started leaving. And by January, they announced that nobody's going over and people are coming home, and they're already, a good portion of them had left Vietnam. And it got down in February, first part of March, we were pretty vacant. We had a lot of empty barracks, and we had difficulty. We couldn't even defend our personal protection. And we had to go out and hire, and that's what we were given instruction to hire local indigenous personnel. Well, we didn't know if we were hiring Viet Cong or who we were hiring.
So there were not ARVNs still guarding the base at that point?
No. There were some, but not that many. And then, they were going to take over the base. And during the time that our troops left until they were taken over, why, thievery had taken place. Electrical features were gone, plumbing was gone from the barracks, and I was responsible for getting a signature for the buildings from a Vietnamese Air Force colonel who was they were going to take over as an air base. And he wouldn't sign because the buildings weren't complete. And and I was supposed to get a signature for it and release it. So I told him, I said, "Well, you're going to have to sign, Colonel, or I'm going to burn the barracks." And he didn't think I was serious. And I told my sergeant major, I said, "Get a wad of paper, Sergeant Major, and start a fire right over there in that building. We're going to burn that building, we're going to burn that and that one. This is going to be the biggest fire this guy's ever seen." And the sergeant major looked at me, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Sergeant Major, get with it." So he got some paper, went over there, and I said, "Wait a minute, I'll sign for the building," and just the way they are. And I thought that was kind of amusing, but it was a tough time. That we didn't have people there. One of the nicest things, just before the end, is when the Four Power Peace Commission came in. The Canadians and the Indonesians on the west side, and the Hungarians and Poles on the east side. And my job there was to see that they were supported, had billets for them and all. And it just happened that I had 4 55-foot house trailers that we'd vacate other colonels that had. And I set them up and had all the plumbing and everything for them. And when they came down, all colonels from all 4 of those nations arrived at the same time. And they had some staff and all, but they didn't come that day. And they said, well, which one is mine? Which one do they have? I said, that's up to you fellas. You decide. I'm not going to say there's 4 trailers, there's 4 of you. You decide which one you want. Because I know if I said something and there's something wrong with it and it went to the wrong guy, then the U.S. is playing favoritism. Well, the Canadian, he understood, and he says, I'll take that one. And the Indonesian, he wasn't too sure. And the other said, well, we'll have to talk with Saigon. And it took a couple of days before they could get permission to even select one, and a couple of guys from Saigon came down, take a look at them, see what's available. And by that time, the Canadian already moved in, and he's all set up, and they're still bunking. And anyway, well, it finally came around. They were interesting to deal with, but the communist side couldn't make up their mind on anything. And I'll have to admit that I had a party for them, and there's a drink or two around, and then they each reciprocated. And this one night, this Hungarian colonel, and he and I we were a little testy with one another, but he says, to interpret, do you arm wrestle? Well, I said, I have. I'm not very good at it, but I have. So we had a contest, arm wrestling contest, and he beat me. That really bothered me, that he beat me. But anyway.
Okay. Now, during the time you were there, I mean, how much enemy activity was there out in the country around you?
Very little. We would get mortared once in a while. In fact, I have a picture of the last mortar round that came in on that airfield before we left, and it happened to be a dud, and it was about 12 or 15 feet from our barracks where our GIs were, and thank God it was a dud. But there wasn't much. It was in the hinterlands, there was stuff, but around Can Tho, around the airfield, almost none. Occasionally a mortar round, occasionally somebody would take a shot, but it was not.
But the Cav Squadron had business. I mean, there were things to go out and shoot.
Oh
at.
yeah, they would go out. Yeah, but then when they left, we were still there, and that's when we were concerned about the business. But yeah, the Cav, they were busy. They were, because there were still some U.S. forces out and some advisory teams that were out, and they needed help once in a while. And those Cav guys are good. They went out and they did the job, but then they had to pull out too.
Yeah. Well, there's an assortment of stereotypes and things that are out there about Vietnam, and Americans there, especially toward the end of it. And one of them is that there are a lot of problems with drug use at that time. Did you see that at all where you were?
I did not. I'm not saying we didn't have it, but if it was it was with the combat, or not the combat units, the support units, and they were leaving. And by this time, most of them were gone, and what was left were the senior people, and the senior people, by and large, didn't become involved in that stuff.
Right.
And all throughout the time I was in the Army, very seldom was I ever even aware that there was drugs around. And I don't think it was because I had my head in the sand. Because combat units, you couldn't afford to get gouged up and not be able to function. And most everybody adhered to that. Now there's others that sometimes specific instances that's not true. But and I'm not trying to blow my horn because I was there. That didn't make any difference for that, if I was there or not. But it was not as prevalent in the combat units as it was in the rear areas.
Okay. And what was sort of the morale like among the units that were on that base while you were there?
They knew they were going home, and let's get home. And that was a problem. They wanted to go home. And no one was court-martialed except one officer was court-martialed for dereliction of duty, and I pushed that charge. and I didn't threaten anybody that don't do that. I'm going to court-martial you. You don't talk like that. They knew they were going home, and most of them realized, hey, we got a tough job here. We got to hang on until we're going home. So let's make sure we all survive and all get home. And that's.
So you didn't have a whole lot of problem with people refusing to obey orders or go out or anything like that?
No, but let me tell you, we had ceasefire periods when the Fort Power Commission came in, and they even wanted us to get rid of our personal weapons. We didn't, but anyway, the Kongs shot down a twin rotor helicopter in a time there was no fire. Nobody was firing. Went down, 17 kids got killed on that thing. And fortunately, the pilot was able to get the location back, but he was dead too, everybody. And I had the overall responsibility of extracting the bodies and what we could salvage and that. And I was having trouble getting the technicians out there, the right guys to take care of this, and the morticians and all this kind of stuff. And it was a hectic time. And then we came under a small ground attack. And we had to get people out there to fend that off. And I came back into headquarters about, I don't know, 2 or 3 days. I hadn't much to sleep at all. And I came into headquarters, and they're shouting down the hallway. Sergeant Major, I recognized his voice, and a scruffy-looking civilian, and American. And he was a reporter for CBS News. And he was demanding to go out to the crash site. And he came up and he hit me in the chest with his finger.
You're also pounding close to your microphone there, so that makes it nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, he said, "You're denying the American people their right to know." And I said, "I'm not denying them anything." I said, "I got a job to do here. We got to recover the bodies. We got to get the equipment out of there, and we got to protect that site. And only people are going out there that are going to help. And you can get this story later." Well, he kept on, and I Sergeant Major, get some MPs up here and throw this guy off this base. And he did, and they did. And out he went. Well, he dropped his notebook in his scuffle, in his haste to leave the base. And I was unscrupulous enough that I kept it and read it. And he had already written a story that the GIs refused to go out and recover the bodies of their dead comrades. And that just was 100% wrong. And it really fired me, so I kept it for a while, and after a couple of days I sent it up through channels, and I said, "Mr. Jones inadvertently dropped this in his haste to leave the post." I didn't hear any more about it, but it just really corked me, and I wasn't too keen on the news people anyway, because they would misquote you, and I know deliberately, but all right.
Well, while he was on the base, did he observe you having difficulty getting personnel together to go out there, or anything to base that story on, or did he just make it up?
He made it up. We had more volunteers. The problem we had was to sort out so that we got the right guys out there. It wasn't that we didn't have it. They all wanted to go. And we just couldn't do it. And then he comes up with, no, there was no trouble. We didn't ever have any trouble with GIs coming to one another's assistance. They do it. And but anyway.
Yeah. One of the other common places that it comes up has to do with race relations. Did you have a mixed population on your base, and how did things go?
And again, I don't know of any. None of it came to my attention. There was no big problem. If there was, it was handled below my level. And again, in fighting units, that's very, very rare. In the previous tour, when we were all, when the first troops went over to Vietnam, they were integrated. In Korea, excuse me.
Korea,
went into Korea. We were segregated, and then they said they integrated because one battalion in each regiment was a colored battalion. And then in all the other battalions were all white, and the colored battalion had white officers. Well, by the time we got to Korea, it didn't work. You had to, so and we had colored guys. One of the bravest man I ever was around was a colored soldier, a platoon medic, and I put him in for the DSC. And he didn't get anything, and I know it was because he was colored, and I didn't write that well, but no, we didn't. We really, I'm sure there was some.
Yeah, well, you had it in other places, in other situations, but again, as you've said, in Vietnam, a lot just depended on where you were and which bunch you were with and what the situation was at the time. And for the troops that you've got left at that point, you've got some people who are pretty well qualified combat people, plus if you're dealing with aviators and things like that, that's a different group in some of those units. And you don't have large numbers of rear area base personnel. And
they'd already gone.
Yeah, and the line units are long gone. A lot of the places where you would have had a lot of the draftees also are gone. So in your situation, so basically what you had were American soldiers who were doing their jobs pretty much for as long as they were there to do them.
They did, and they did a good job at it. I think they all realized that this was the end and we were leaving, and let's make it right when we leave. And that sounds, sounds like, well, that old colonel just trying to build himself up, but that's not true.
Now talk a little bit, describe the last few days that you spent out there in the process of getting out of Vietnam.
Oh, that was interesting. First of all, we had to make sure we didn't leave anybody. We had, and some guys had girlfriends out, and some of them threatened to stay with the girlfriend and that kind of thing. If we knew about it, why, we brought him in. He didn't have a chance to go out with his girlfriends. Some of them we didn't know about. We just had to keep track, had a head count every day, and made sure we knew where everybody was. And it got down to the last day, and there was like, I don't know, 23 or 33 of us left, sergeant major and headquarters types. Most all the workers had already been gone, and they sent a 123 down from Saigon to pick us up, and we took the flag down. And sergeant major, we had a little ceremony. He handed me the flag, and I had instructions to turn it in when I got to Saigon. And we went up there to turn it in, and there was a big mess in Saigon because everybody was, from all the outlying areas were coming in, and everybody was trying to get things done and get out. And I had to sign a certificate that I had accounted for 100% of the personnel that we had. And I tried to turn the flag in, and I couldn't find any place that would accept it. I said, all right, I'll take care of it. And I'm still taking care of that flag. The last flag that flew down there, I still got it. And I'm kind of proud of that. But it went smoother than I thought it would go. There were some glitches, but overall, that last evacuation was, and this is not to be confused with the evacuation you saw on television.
In 75, yeah.
Yeah, 75. That was at the embassy. All the troops were out by that time, except for the embassy guard, and that was the embassy, and we didn't have.
Okay. So now you're out in 73, and then you stay in the Army for about another 5 years after that. So what do you do for that last period?
Well, it had been apparent that officer from career management that said that I was at the apex of a mediocre career was pretty much correct. I did get promoted to colonel, and I had a choice. I could have gone to the Pentagon as a flunky. I could have gone and taken command of Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. It was camp then, it's a fort now. Or I could have gone on ROTC duty. I took ROTC duty because I thought I had an effect on young officers coming in. I thought I could do something. And I went to Pocatello, Idaho. Most people never heard of that. And it was Idaho State University. And they had a small ROTC unit. They had a large anti-war problem on the campus. And as a result, they were borderline whether they were even going to be able to keep ROTC because they weren't getting enough guys and gals by this time in. And I went there, and not knowing this, but it wouldn't make any difference. That I didn't want to go to the Pentagon, and I wasn't going to be a flunky in some headquarters because I had worked for a flunky in headquarters that were at the end of the road, and I wasn't going to be one. Anyway, I was there, and I had some good junior officers that came in. They were outstanding, and they have all made colonel since then. None of them made general yet, and they're done now, but they all made colonel. And they worked their tail off. We had outdoor activity. Idaho was a place for out there skiing and mountain climbing and rappelling and rafting. And we had rafts together from the Army, and our program started to grow because we offered things. Only one time did I have any personal attack on and I'd been on the campus maybe a week, and I was going down to have my interview with the president of the university. And I'm, of course, in uniform, and there was one stoplight on that campus, and I was waiting for it to change, and this, I call him a hippie, guy came up on his bicycle, long hair and scruffy looking, dirty clothes, and he kept cocking his leg on the pedals and looking at me, and when I'd look at him, he'd look away. And as soon as the light changed, he turned and looked at me, and he says, "And I suppose you killed women and children, too." Well, I responded with a terrible expletive deleted comment, and I regret it, but I did, and I never saw him again. He took off, and there was people around, and that's what bothered me. I embarrassed myself by the response that I gave, and it was not a good one. And I have tried not to do that since. But
right. Did the people, your ROTC students, did they get hassled as far as you know, or?
Some, but not a whole lot. The program, because we were doing things, we'd take guys that weren't even in the ROTC program, take them out rafting or skiing or rappelling. That was a big deal, was rappelling. And I had to catch my breath a time or two because I hadn't rappelled since I was in Ranger School. And for an old fat man to jump off the edge of the cliff, but I couldn't back off. I had all those kids. And anyway, it was fun. It was a fun assignment. And another thing, of course, it was predominantly a Mormon area. And at that time, the rumor or the information I had, there was a higher percentage of Mormons in Pocatello than there was in Salt Lake City, because there was a lot of other people in Salt Lake City. But it was a good assignment, and I retired from there.
All right. And now what have you done since then?
Oh, I did several things. I drove a school bus, had my comeuppance there. Hadn't had anybody talk back to me in quite a while as a colonel. I sold light airplanes. Initially, I worked for a company out of Denver, which set up collection programs for credit bureaus and businesses in small towns. And we didn't go out and do the thing. We just set the program up. And it was effective, and pretty effective, in towns of about 30,000. Any bigger than that, it didn't work very good. Smaller, but probably wasn't worth time going in. But we made it pretty good. We were living in a trailer, house, Airstream trailer, my wife and I. She was working too. I happened to become a team chief, and so I got a percentage of what everybody on the team did, plus mine. And I tell my wife, "Now you get out there and hustle." And you can imagine, but anyway, it was a fun deal. And I ended up working with the school district. I drove school bus, and then I became in charge of the school buses, the kitchens, all the maintenance type stuff, custodians, plumbers, carpenters, and that kind of stuff. And after working there for a year, I went into superintendent, and I said to, and I knew him, I said, "Dick, in my life I've never voted against a school levy. But after having worked here for a year, I'm never voting for another one. You guys just throw it away." And I didn't, and he didn't fire me. I thought he would, but he didn't.
And where was that you were doing that?
That was in Olympia, Washington, back home.
I was still back in Washington.
Yeah.
So how'd you wind up in Michigan?
My son married a girl. One of my sons married a girl from Michigan, and he is just retired as being a pastor, Assembly of God pastor. He worked initially over here on 44th Street in the First Assembly, and just recently he spent the last 12 years in Mount Morris, on the other side of the state, and he just retired. My other son is in California, Carlsbad. But this guy married a girl from met at the University of Kansas, and they have been ever since. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl, and now we've got 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl.
Okay. So you're here because family is here.
Yeah, family's here.
Now, to look back at this career that you spent in the Army, what do you think you took out of it, or how did that affect you, or the way you see things now?
I think it made me more of a conservative than I was when I began. I think it gave me a better appreciation for the problems that some of our politicians have. Some not theirs. They didn't cause them, and I've tried to be a little more tolerant of some of that. My wife says I've gone the other way. But I think that's the main thing. I think I'd like to think that I found a way to develop with, to work with people, and particularly young people, much better than I would have had I not had that experience.
All right. Well, it makes for a pretty remarkable story, so thank you for coming in and sharing it today.
Well, I'm glad to do it.
I never seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
It was different. If I had done something else, I don't know what I would have done.